Hi, my name is Evelyn Walker. I am a third year communication studies major, and today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the relationship that there is between wildfires and climate change. So, just a statistic to start us off, since 2000, as many of us California residents are very well aware of, we have seen a rapid increase in the number of wildfires each year and just overall, an increase in the severity of fire seasons each year. And so just kind of to go along with that, according to the National Interagency Fire Center, from 2000 to 2022, a total of 164 million acres of land had burned in the United States alone. And just to kind of give you like a visual idea of what that looks like, that's going to be equivalent to about 124 million football fields. Or just another little visual, that would also be equivalent to the entire state of Texas. And that is, again, like I mentioned, in the United States alone. So that's not taking into consideration, the fire we saw a few years back in Australia, that recent fire in Brazil, amongst many others. So just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm going to talk about today, with climate worsening each year, it's really important for us to sort of identify, what are the sources of the climate change that we're really experiencing right now. And a big one is going to be wildfires, especially in California, as I mentioned. So to dive a little deeper into that, I'm going to discuss the relationship between climate change and wildfires, the residual impacts that wildfires have on climate change, and then what's currently being done to sort of help reduce the severity of fire seasons each year. So just to give you a little bit about what I did to sort of research this topic, I went into a thorough research throughout with many news sources of a wide variety. I also went through a number of government websites, which provided a lot of data and statistics about, past fire seasons that we've experienced. It kind of showed that difference between, before 2000, what our fire seasons looked like then compared to now, and you can really see the clear difference there. In addition to that, I also gained some insight from my boyfriend, Zach, who is a member of the Veterans Hotshot crew in Placerville, California. And he's also currently going to school right now for fire science. So I didn't get direct information from him, but I did get some, ideas on where to look, what things to look up for news and stuff. So that definitely helped. And so just a preview of the topics that I'm going to be talking about, as I mentioned before, I'm going to talk about the relationship between wildfires and climate change and how that sort of comes in the form of this never-ending cycle and it just feeds off of one another. And then I'm also going to go into the impacts of wildfires and how those go beyond just the immediate impacts that are caused with, the time period of the burning that the fire takes place in, and how it goes beyond that, and there's more residual impacts that are really affecting our climate. Lastly, I'm going to dive into what actions are currently being taken and how we can kind of, propose alterations to those actions that could pertain to be even more beneficial to our climate. So like I mentioned, the first point I'm going to talk about is the relationship between wildfires and climate change. So, like I said, it is this never-ending cycle. So just to start off, I want to give a quote from Dina Pulver from US Today. Quote, "Federal officials say extremes in drought and heat fueled by climate change are drying out forests in the West and Alaska and are the leading driver of an increase in fire weather." So it's important to just quickly note that although wildfires are not directly caused by climate change is, causing the current state of the land where all these wildfires are taking place. So it's really drying out this land, just making it this prime fuel for wildfires. And we have seen that in California, obviously. Another quote stated by Henry Fountain at the New York Times says, "Wildfires can have a global impact as well because burning vegetation releases planet-warming carbon dioxide." So that's really the point that I want to hone in on here. So when wildfires occur, a significant amount of carbon dioxide is just immediately released into the atmosphere, which is contributing to our greenhouse gases, which then in turn increases our overall temperature of the Earth within our atmosphere, which is what we are calling climate change. We're seeing the melting of the ice caps and just overall drier seasons, especially here in California, as I keep mentioning. But yeah, so that's what we're seeing from that. And so outside of these high amounts of CO2 released from the burning of wildfires are leaving these residual impacts that are also contributing to climate change. And a lot of these residual impacts we're not very aware of, so I just wanted to touch on that. Like I said, the impact of wildfires does not simply end after the wildfire is put out. It goes on. So depending on sort of the severity of the fire in terms of, how long it burned, what was burned, the region, all of that, the recovery time for that area, for that ecosystem, for that vegetation is going to sort of vary. And unfortunately, when we lose all that vegetation in, for example, trees, which are used to reduce greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, we're seeing higher levels of carbon dioxide because they're not being brought out of the atmosphere and photosynthesized. So they're all staying there, which is leading to this overwhelming amount of carbon dioxide right now. And so to kind of go along with that, according to Andy Newman from the New York Times, vegetation can recover within 1 to 2 years. And although 1 to 2 years seems pretty short, we kind of have to think of it, okay, 1 to 2 years, that's 1 to 2 years that all of that vegetation that was burned within that 1 year, which I believe it was about an average that we're seeing so far, about 7 million acres. So imagine 7 million acres of trees not being able to photosynthesize carbon dioxide. That's going to add up to a lot of carbon dioxide that we're seeing in our atmosphere. And so when you consider that, CO2 levels, very high. And so now that we know the relationship between climate change and wildfires and how residual impacts of wildfires also contribute to climate change, it's important to look at what steps are currently being taken to aid in preventing and managing wildfires and their seasons. But I also want to look at, what little critiques could we make to these actions that would even benefit fire seasons even more and kind of just reduce it as much as we can. So according to Matthew Brown with the Associated Press, the United States is directing $930 million towards reducing wildfire dangers in 10 western states by clearing trees and underbrush from national forests. And so although clearing trees and underbrush is a great tactic for reducing, the potential of wildfires and the severity of it, it kind of creates this boundary around towns, if you're in a heavily forested area, it's also not that great of a tactic. And this is why. It's because by removing all of this vegetation, we're removing all of these sources to photosynthesize carbon dioxide, which means we're leaving that carbon dioxide out there in the atmosphere, which is just going to keep continuing to affect climate change in a negative way. So, if we don't have to do it, we don't have to remove more vegetation, that would be the most beneficial thing. But, there's only so much people can do. So it's also important to note that according to the National Park Service, about 85% of all wildfires in the United States are caused by humans. So specifically caused. So I know I mentioned how climate change is causing it indirectly more so, but humans are the ones actually causing it, like leaving a campfire unmaintained, poor power lines, malfunctioning of equipment. And so just kind of go along with those power lines, because that's been a big topic of discussion, especially here in California, because a lot of power lines from PG&E have caused some fires. There have been multiple advertisements, I'm sure you guys have seen them, but PG&E has been making efforts to move all of their power lines underground to sort of reduce that risk of causing wildfires. And so, like I mentioned, although we have been seeing a lot of action taken towards reducing the threat of wildfires, unfortunately, it's just not enough to make a difference large enough to see sort of rebalancing of our climate right now. So I definitely think that these actions are going to have to be revisited, and there's going to need to be some alterations and whatnot. So wildfires, once again, they are not just a temporary threat that lasts just the duration of its activity where it's actively burning. It poses a rather long-lasting threat to our climate. And so just to kind of restate what I went over, with climate worsening each year, it's really, again, like I mentioned, important to identify all the sources. And although wildfires are a big one, it's not the only one. So I outlined sort of the cause and effect relationship by discussing, the relationship that's this never-ending cycle between climate change and wildfires. And then I also talked about the residual impacts of wildfires on climate change. And then lastly, I just discussed briefly what's sort of being done right now to help combat these severe fire seasons and, ways that we can kind of change that to aid us better in the future. And so just to close this off, I just want to say that, like I mentioned just a few seconds ago, there are many sources to climate change. Wildfires happen to be a big one, especially for us California residents, where we're seeing it all the time. We have terrible fire seasons. And I just really wanted to highlight that and how wildfires are a major contributor and have brought great devastation to our ecosystem and our climate. And just to kind of help us ponder on, what steps could we take to sort of help this whole situation. Thank you very much for listening.